Welcome, everybody. We are here for the ABP Research Seminar Series number 5, talking about some Southern built environments, focusing today on Southern urbanism in South American context. We are going to be hearing from three very distinguished researchers in the field, Leonardo, Sandra, and Associate Professor Maza. And I will be inviting them for this conversation in just a few minutes. My name is Ariadne dos Santos Daye. I am an architect, urbanist, and senior partner at Jaime Lerner Arquitetos Associados. After the presentation, will be time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, and I hope you do, please address them through the Q&A button that you have at the bottom of your screen. I would like to begin today's proceedings by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which this event is taking place, which may be multiple lands, given the locations of all of you. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the place of indigenous knowledge in the Academy. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. I would like to thank very much Durley for this invitation. I had the good fortune of being part of MSD for a brief period in 2018 and meeting my fellow panelists in person. It's wonderful to see you again. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Leonardo Nogueira de Moraes. Leonardo is a professional and academic expert in tourism, resilience, and planning. His work looks at urban and regional planning and community self-organization with a focus on tourism development and building social-ecological resilience to disasters and environmental change. His research spreads across Australia, Brazil, and Scandinavia, and he's currently an honorary fellow at the University of Melbourne. He will have about 10 minutes for his presentation. I'm sure we will want more. And he's going to be presenting land rights, environmental conservation, and strategic role of oceanic islands for defense, implications to citizenship and connections to land. The case of Fernando de Noronha Archipelago in Brazil. Leonardo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ariadne. Good day, everyone. Thank you, Julie, for the invitation to be part of this discussion. It is a pleasure to be here today. Before we start our conversation, I would also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we stand here today at the University of Melbourne. And I would also like to acknowledge all Indigenous custodians of the lands on which you may be watching this seminar series today, as well as any Indigenous people who may be joining this event. I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and I recognize their long-standing, generational, and ongoing connection to land and water, as well as their caring for country. This presentation is an output of my PhD and subsequent research conducted since 2015. And I'm thankful to all the people and organizations listed here, as well as to the respondents and Noronha community members for their support throughout this research project. Today, I'll discuss the building of resilience in remote communities by presenting the case of Fernando de Noronha Archipelago in Brazil. And I hope our conversation on this topic can spark some insightful reflections on how we approach planning practice in Australia and elsewhere. Core to community resilience is our capacity to respond and to adapt to adverse events and to continue to thrive despite these events. And this kind of adaptive capacity requires the nurturing of community self-organization and ensuring that levels of regulatory control are not detrimental to these processes. And critical to our adaptation is our capacity to tap into local and global resources in sustainable ways. And that asks us to reflect on how we connect to place with each other and with local and global knowledge and systems. In that scenario, managing connectivity is a critical component of building resilience. Tourism development and the proclamation or designation of protected areas are two very important drivers that shape the way communities connect locally and globally. Tourism is an important sector for Australia, of course, in the global economy, but one that is very sensitive to events of significance, as we can see in this graph. Its growth can be understood as being highly connected with the growth of globalization itself. However, as you may be aware, travel and tourism has been highly impacted by the pandemic. And despite its overall growth prior to COVID-19, its growth curve for Australia illustrates both the positive and the negative impacts of past events. As tourism was continually growing prior to COVID, it was also raising questions around tourist flows and potentially overshooting community social carrying capacity in many places, leading to loss of social license, a phenomenon known as overtourism. There's evidence of this in places like Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, but also in South America. The designation of protected area coverage is also on the rise, as we can see in these graphs here from the 2020 Protected Planets report. And interestingly, many protected areas have designated areas for recreation, and they become important tourism draw cards. Importantly, apart from local protected areas, those designated by states or federal governments are usually justified by reasons that transcend local needs. Just to give you a bit of a sense of where Noronha is located, we're talking about the South Atlantic, some 3 degrees south of the equator of the coast of Brazil, some 545 kilometers from its main connecting airport in the mainland. It's a small area and it's got a reasonably sized population that translates as a fairly densely populated area, showcasing almost twice the average density for the state of Pernambuco, of which it's part, and almost 8 times that of Brazil. It portrays a unique set of environmental features and somewhat fragile ecosystems and threatened species. And it's subject to several layers of protection through protected areas. It's also a very strategic outpost for defense of the Brazilian territory since its colonization by the Portuguese from the 1500s onwards. Tourism is on the rise in Noronha, as we can see here in these figures pre-pandemic. And it surpassed 110,000 visitors in 2019, which is about 35 times the size of its population. Even though there is some differences in terms of seasons and some peaks and troughs, we can see that most of the time the tourism is operating at a high level. And what is of concern is that tourist flows run in an opposite way to that of rainfall. So when we have the largest number of people is when we have the least water on that archipelago. There have been quite a few tourist carrying capacity studies, but what we can see here is that they're usually overshooting that capacity during peak seasons. Now we can see how these protected areas and levels of restrictions have progressed over time. You can see here different levels of restrictions for both terrestrial areas and marine areas, and how they have evolved over time. So in dark green and in dark blue are the most restrictive areas, whereas brown and purple, dark purple are the least restrictive. And we can see that that progresses quite a bit over time. And most of the territory, both land and water, become more and more restricted to land use and development over time. This is an overview of the marine areas surrounding the archipelago as well, which are highly protected. It's worth noting here that Noronha has got a national marine park, an environmental protection area. It is also listed as Natural World Heritage by UNESCO. It's part of a biosphere reserve, as well as a Ramsar site. So as you can see, there are lots and lots of layers of protection. And that makes land use planning and development quite a complex task, involving a lot of different organizations. So the area covered by the marine park, for example, is managed by the Ministry for the Environment and through the Shikumenjis Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, whereas most of the settlement area is managed by the State District Administration for Fernando de Noronha, and the areas surrounding the airport by the Ministry for Defense and the Air Force. So Noronha is actually the only example of a state district in Brazil, whereas all other areas are covered by municipalities. And that brings some consequences in terms of how governance takes place in Noronha. So Noronha has got a local state district council with elected members, but they have no legislative or executive powers. They just oversee the administration of the archipelago. So because of this lack of representation, the community has found ways in which to better participate in decision-making by self-organizing into different sectors of economic activity and community representation. And by formalizing these groups into formal organizations, they were able to secure seats in the councils that oversee the two protected areas that apply to Fernando de Noronha. And this way, they sit alongside lots of different public and government organizations when it comes to discussing issues that may affect their livelihoods. And that includes fishermen organizations, as well as boat operators, dive operators, and grassroots organizations related to environmental conservation and heritage protection as well. That's a very interesting example of how self-organization has taken place in the specific case of Fernando de Noronha. And this has been really fundamental when it comes to countering some of the effects of globalization and gentrification, which have been constant pressures in the archipelago. And part of the research was really trying to do that, to try to understand how global structures or global forces were interacting with local structures in Fernando de Noronha, and how mechanisms were in place to sometimes counter these actions. So this diagram just illustrates a little bit of those relationships. We can see in the very middle, we're talking about some entry barriers, the way they affect what I call global-local cooperation and competition, as well as the effects of global cooperation and competition, and local cooperation and competition. What this graph shows us is that there is somehow a set of feedback loops when it comes to benchmarking, right? The more you have in terms of impacts coming from global structures, the more intense local competition can become, and the more it pushes for cooperation between local businesses and global businesses as well as part of that process. So key to this building of resilience in the particular case of Noronha is how the community has been self-organizing locally through those organizations to counter some of these external pressures and ensure that there is some reasonable level of local empowerment still taking place in that community. And that is also something that has been quite fundamental for social cohesion as well. So I'll finish up here because I understand we have a very short time and we want to make sure everyone is having their presentations, but I would just like to present this very brief conclusion. Overall here, we're talking about small oceanic islands as being very interesting examples that we can look at when it comes to building community resilience and facing many of the challenges that we are facing today, including those related to climate change. These islands, they really offer a good opportunity for us to better understand the way local places connect with global structures. And some of the reasons behind that is that they portray very clear boundaries. It's much easier to look into islands as systems, local systems that are interacting with these global systems. It's easier to understand the flow of resources, the flow of and mobility of people who come and who leave these islands, and we can better spot how these relationships are taking place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonardo, for your fascinating presentation. And from Fernando de Noronha, Brazil, we are going to Chile with the presentation of Sandra Carrasco. Sandra is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Newcastle, Australia. She received the postdoctoral Mackenzie Fellowship at the University of Melbourne. And Sandra is a Peruvian architect and holds a PhD and a master's in environmental management from Kyoto University in Japan, and a master's in education from the Victoria University. She has a professional and research experience in the Americas, Asia, and Oceania, and her research interests include equality and diversity, community resilience, disaster risk reduction, governance, and city planning. Also, migrating and refugee studies. Sandra, we are looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for organizing this event. Hello to everyone. It's a big pleasure for me to be here in this event. So I also would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Pambalong clan of the Awabaka people on whose traditional land this Calahan campus of the University of Newcastle is located. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in southern Chile, among the different ethnic groups, the Mapuche community. Okay, the research that I'm going to present today is based on a study that we started with Dr. David O'Brien from the University of Melbourne in 2017. I've seen that most, if you are familiar with architecture or urban planning, at least in South America, you will see a very familiar project here. So this is, I will start with an image, a very powerful image of how cities are seen in South America, or mostly most of the global South, where for our audience here in Australia and in other countries in the global North might sound alien. For us in the global South is more than the exception is the norm. So this is how we build our cities. This is how we build our homes. So this process, of course, is actually something that we forgot in the global north. Is the incremental production of housing. So this is an example of, for example, in Peru, in my home country, how the houses are produced within the informal framework. So whenever there is an empty land, we go through different stages from more precarious and makeshift constructions to gradually start for more permanent and even more complex construction buildings. So that makes our homes and what makes even our society. So and again, we see that in our countries in the global south, based on some estimations, from 50 to 80% of the homes are built incrementally. So it means that it's a phenomenon that is widely seen. And unfortunately, most of the cases is seen as something negative, but also there are so many positive issues here. So the project that I was mentioned to you that we started in 2017, mostly focused on two projects. After seeing that this is how our cities evolve and how our homes are built in our region. So and seeing that the authorities or the government's attitudes was mostly negative, and also the people's opinion was negative, and there was a lot of stigma attached to this kind of urban evolution or urban growth, we went to a place and we wanted to see what happens if these houses, or the way how the houses are planned or settlements are planned, rather than discourage this incremental construction, encourage this to the residents. So these are two very famous projects built by or designed by the architecture studio Elemental in Chile, and that is run by Alejandro Aravena, who was awarded with the Pritzker Prize in 2016. For those who know what is a Pritzker Prize, is equivalent to the Nobel in architecture. And the subsequent winner of the Pritzker Prize was also an Indian architect who also was a lot into this idea of promoting the capacities of the people to build their own homes. So this is something that is finally being acknowledged at global level. So, but why focusing on Elemental's projects? So first is because it has a strong presence in Chile. So there are 11 housing projects that were designed by this studio. And there is already one in Mexico. So it means that it's expanding. Beyond the physical extension or increasing of the projects, this concept of incremental housing, or promoting the incremental development of the housing, has been widely discussed at different levels, from the government levels, from the or to the academic levels. So you will, when we talk about housing, especially in the global south, almost everywhere the students know about this kind of projects. So that's why there's the relevance. So today I'm going to focus on the second project, that is the project in Villa Verde. It was built in 2013. We have also very interesting analysis of what happened in Quinta Monroy that was built in 2005, which was a former informal settlement, but that would be for a next occasion. So please, I would like you to invite me again I can present about it. So the idea of why it is important to look at incremental housing in Chile. So Chile, that is a little bit a different case, because has invested, as a country, has invested a lot in social housing, even during the dictatorship between 70s and 90s, and until the late 80s. So, but they built houses focusing on the quantitative concerns rather than really trying to build communities and to understand what is home rather than a place to live. So that they created phenomenon of the kind of homeless, but homeless with a roof over their heads. So the people with a roof over their heads. So it means that they have a place to live, but they don't have a home. And it's within this context where this idea of elemental emerged. So going a little bit into the project itself. So the context of the project is this project is located in the city of Constitución. So this is the southern part of Chile. In the project actually started, the initial planning of the project started in 2009. By the time the project was already in the middle of the planning, Chile was hit by an earthquake in 2010, which heavily affected the city. So more than half of the people population was displaced, and many of them were permanently displaced. So it's within this context where this project also is being built, and a project that initially emerged as a project from a private company to support or to facilitate the access for a home for the workers, expanded and became was open for disaster victims and became a post-disaster housing project. So this is where it actually becomes more and more interesting. So the idea of elemental was that to engage the local people, the residents, in the co-production of the houses, which in exchange would reduce the cost of the houses, because we are talking about social housing. And Aravena, in one of his interviews, did something that sounds quite interesting. He says, I quote, "With the right design, slums and favelas might not be the problem, but actually a possible solution." I would like you to think about it. So can we as architects or planners with our designs have the key to solve the problems that are in slums and favelas? I believe personally that this is a very arrogant statement, and which actually it fuel our interest to see what's really happening there beyond the available publications that mostly are advertisement of the projects, and even in academic books when they talk about informality, they just praise these projects. Nobody really care about to see what happens with the people. So to give you an idea, what is not just the house itself, it's the whole settlement. We know that we cannot isolate a house or isolate a family. We need to think also the collective dimension. So we see that it's a settlement where the houses are grouped around courtyard. So this is this idea comes from colonial times, where there used to be very big houses and families who should live there and share their common activities around a courtyard. So they try to replicate this. There is a model that also was applied in Quinta Monroy. We've seen that there's some failures in that. So they basically copy and paste. So in another word, not even in the urban design, they really made their homework and look for the feedback of how it works. But it's how it was. It creates an interesting phenomenon, and that actually segregates a community. To put you in the context, after the completion of the project, of course, people moved in. They knew that these houses were built for them in 2009. There was an initial planning stage, and the houses were completed in 2013. So 3 years after the earthquake. And so they knew that they would have to move in. They knew that they had to invest in building the homes. They knew which houses were there for them, but still there was no no place to focus on building communities. So then when people moved in 2013, there were two neighbors associations, and gradually they started to deteriorate. And it was just because of the intervention of NGOs that they were able to build not two communities, just one. One community is strong, one community is very weak, unfortunately, but at least they did it. So with the idea of building and providing a framework, that's what Elemental said, providing a framework of a safe structure where people could build their own homes and expand it. There was supposed to be some freedom for them. This is actually what we wanted to see, freedom for them to build, to make their homes. And but when we analyzed the process itself, there was no such freedom because there was a clear framework, whatever were the limits. And each household were given this habitability manual, which actually provides guidelines for them how to build, where to build, and states that building beyond that framework, the construction becomes illegal and becomes not just informal, becomes illegal. So we start to think again, what is the benefit of this? So if it's supposed to provide the people the flexibility to build the homes, if you put limits, what is the impact of this? And this is a little bit what we have seen. So to see when we did the mapping in the settlements, so we've seen that still there were people who were not having modified homes, people who made a partial infill to partially completed the homes based on what they were the planners' ideas or the designers' ideas. They made a full infill, most of them, but there were people who started to build beyond the framework. So they made front extension. So actually that was what it was visible at the moment. And it was very interesting to see that it's not just a matter of building, but it's a matter of how they start to do it. So I hope there is another chance to go more into detail, but I would like to show you what was the opinion of the people about this. So how was their sacrifices and investment to do this. Well, this is a mapping, the mapping we did in the settlement. And this is also, we started to see the complexity and how people still, even after they completed the framework, what the designer thought, there was still people want to build more. This is how the residents, they build more than was expected and faster than it was expected. It means that there's a big capacity there. So even though they're low-income people, many of them were disaster affected people, they still have the capacity. It means that we should rethink this idea of incremental housing to adjust to this, to what we can actually achieve with this huge capacity. We've seen that there's a diversification of activities, many of them because of the need. So, and we've seen that there's a more tangible image of what is happening there. So the back yards of the houses are already covered. You can see in one of the images that there's potentially one more floor. So the people are really looking forward to see the many possibilities to expand their homes. So as general findings, so 93% of them, they already built their homes. There is no distinction between disaster victims or not. Both of them, they built. And there is something positive that came from this, because people feel that this is what they did, they achieved. So they have a strong sense of attachment and pride because they built the houses by themselves. Residents are starting to build beyond the framework. There is imbalance between what is the publicized housing design and the actually outcomes. Definitely a good design for incremental housing does not create human settlements. That's our biggest criticism. And community leadership doesn't just emerge spontaneously. It had to be supported by external actors. And also it questions us, it raises another question. So what, if there are boundaries, what would be the boundaries for incremental housing, if there's any, or how we should rethink incremental housing? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra, for such a thoughtful presentation, beautifully illustrated, thought-provoking. Moving on to Professor Masa Noguchi, who is going to be presenting international collaboration on low-cost sustainable housing design innovations in Brazil. Professor Masa is an associate professor in environmental design at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at UniMelb, specializing in environmental experience design, decision-making analysis based on a mass customization framework that embraces machine learning and value engineering techniques for improvement of operational energy efficiency, affordability, and occupants' well-being in the built environment. In parallel to the EXD studies, he also initiated a global movement on zero energy mass custom home, ZEMCH, and vertical village / subdivision plug-in housing systems, research and development for future-proof city evolution. Professor Masa, you have the word.
Thank you very much for introductions. Time is quite short, 10 minutes presentation. So unlike other two brilliant presentations, I'm not going to show the contents of the research itself. Perhaps I'd like to showcase our experience of international collaborations on local housing development in Brazil. So their collaboration couldn't be realized without going through the ZEMICH network collaborative activities. And so this was done with the members of ZEMICH network, which I have been serving as a global coordinator and leading their activities at the international level. And Brazil introduced low-cost housing programs, the Minha Casa Minha Vida programs, which is My House, My Life programs aiming to support vulnerable low-income families in order to have them gain access to adequate affordable housing. And this program was held between 2009 and 14, but extended. And I think up until 2020, and they changed the name, green and yellow house. I don't know why they call it like that, but process is very similar to what they had done before. And this is image of one of the image of Minha Casa Minha Vida housing program, low-cost housing development, and it's obviously it's more organized as opposed to illegal settlements, and a bit of slums, and they call it favela, but it's more shelter. The function is more shelter as opposed to livable communities. In fact, their location is very much isolated from city centers, and they have a little struggle to access the workplace, and unlike where they used to live in. I also visited favela Rohinto. Sandra also showed some pictures, and I visit there. It's not really safe in terms of the structures, and of course, DIY culture. And as you can see, electric wires and everywhere. I mean, it's really scary. But on the other hand, I found the charm, its beauty of the kind of community sense and growth and evolutions. They personalize the house and the space according to needs and demands. I found very beautiful and more livable as opposed to Minha Casa Minha Vida program housing. And that is my not research, my gut feelings. It's more humane and more kind of, livable communities. In 2013, I was given opportunity to visit Brazil with the aim to discuss directly with the housing stakeholders and identify and kind of sharing values related to the housing programs. And we propose, why don't we work together? A collaborative workshop, which was realized next year, 2014, and we call it ZEMICH, a workshop. ZEMICH is abbreviation of Zero Energy Mass Custom Homes. And so, as you can see, a number of professors, executive members of industry join and work together and share the value and identify the problems and aiming to demonstrate the quality affordable housing, turning it into socially, economically, environmentally, and humanly sustainable built environment. One of the things which we wanted to introduce is, think outside the box and mass customizations. Mass customization is oxymoron. How can we combine the different notion of mass production or standardization and customization? Mass production is the key to reduce the initial cost through the enhancement of efficiency in production and communication. Customization is very important. I mean, customize, personalize, and the product according to their diverse needs and demands. And we also introduced some, mass customization communication tools. And one of the beauty, the virtue of the mass customization is the standardization of the components rather than house itself. Miyakasa house is a standardized house. And our approach is to standardize the components that allow the users to pick their housing components and put together like a Lego blocks to customize in the process. That approach is different. And we team up with industry partners, and we built a housing prototype. We call it ZEMICH Brazil. The State University of Londrina offer their space, and we built it using takebaji, wood frame, prefabricated building systems in line with the mass customizations, and we built it within 3 hours. Prefabrication helps reduce site nuisances, bad weather and thief and vandalism and so on. The house has been exhibited, and even if you go Londrina State University, you can find it there. To some extent, we influence the way of delivering locals housing, kind of before and after. Before was so much homogeneous and identical, and now it's a bit more colorful. But colorful, just a color is not enough, and therefore we need to explore further. In 2015, based on our experience of 13-14, ABP approved and having traveling studio to Brazil, and I was given opportunity to bring my students from different diverse disciplines and work together with students at the Sao Paulo University of Sao Paulo, Sao Carlos. 2015 and 2016 was a Curitiba, State University of Paraná. We went there and we ran the workshop 2016, 2016 to 2017. Locally here, we also established the subject, ZEMICH workshop, which comprises the 5 days. And day 1 is a more knowledge transfer, understanding of user needs and demands, and Casamia Vida programs and requirements and expectations, desires, and all kinds of things. And afternoon sessions, energy, environmental simulations. Day 2, visit the site, analyze the status quo, and some kind of functional analysis, and crystallize their knowledge and what design solution would be. And day 3, shape the idea in the form of a housing prototype. Of course, it's not enough, and therefore we need to analyze it. using energy in environmental simulation tools and daylighting, ventilations, domestic energy consumption, and so on. It's not perfect enough. Therefore, we provide option in under the mass customization approach, not only energy environment, but also social demographic needs and demands, and young couples needs and demands are different from nuclear family. Youngster different from their older people. So we have to respect how the house should be designed to grow. Well, this is the Sandra emphasize. I completely agree with what her presentation was. And day 5 is a presentation in the form of oral presentation and poster presentation. After 5 days, they crystallize knowledge and then present it to the housing stakeholders in Brazil. Well, these are some examples and exhibited in ABP in 2016, also exhibited. University of Bio Bio, they want to receive some stimuli from Brazil, therefore having the exhibitions. And 2019, they also run a Zemich workshop for the purpose of quality improvement of post-disaster housing development in a Chilean context. And the Zemich workshop taking place in India next month. And November, again, BMS School of Architecture in India will run it. So the knowledge gained through the workshop and beyond, I'm going to finish within a few seconds, by the way. Disseminated conference taking place in Brazil, and the proceedings and Scopus Index and journal topical collections. And this is my last slides. The research is still ongoing. The workshop itself is provide platforms and started sharing the value for further quality improvement of local housing development. As you can see, 2021, Professor Luisa from Federal University Pelota and Professor Carlos Formoso, Federal University Rio Grande do Sul, published their mass customization of affordable housing this year. So research once again is ongoing, and we are continue our collaboration. I think this is what I like to showcase our experience in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's lovely to see the research done here in my home state, Curitiba and Londrina. So we have some few minutes left, and I would like to invite both the audience at the Japanese room and the people that are connected online to present their questions for our panelists. Don't be shy. If you would like to ask questions to one another as well.
Would it be possible for me to ask a question?
Yes, please.
To Sandra, because of it, I was so inspired, your presentation. Thank you very much. And I very much admire the way elemental architects conducted, allowing the user to do DIY and incremental improvement of their housing qualities. Did you study any relationship between incremental income increase and the increase of their housing development? I assume when enter their house, their income probably quite limited, but the level of income probably increased, and then in response to their growth, increase of their income, probably they can have more opportunities and capacity to contribute or take actions for the growth of their housing. Do you have any comment?
Yes, just give me a second. I can show something that some work that we have in progress. I mean, what we did, when we went there, of course, we haven't seen exactly. I can present it later. But we have when we went there, we didn't see the relationship between the housing extension and how this actually impacted on the people's or the households' income, what we did is that we mapped as a timeline, putting together how the housing progress overlaps with the economic conditions and with the household size conditions. So we know that it's also everything is dynamic. So sometimes they move as a couple, they have children, so the family increase, or sometimes they went as a older family, let's say that with the parents that are almost retired, then the children left, or the children brought in their families again. So we map everything. This was more in a qualitative study. We have wanted to overlap this, and there is and actually we've seen how this has an impact in the way how the houses are built. So we've seen different patterns in a way that there were sometimes very can I say, they were very proactive residents that built very fast and built a lot, and suddenly they stopped. So there is a reason why they stopped. Or there are some others that delayed a lot, even though they knew that they had about 3 years to prepare for this, to save or to do anything else to get those resources. And they built, and they didn't build for many years, and they just started, or some others that they were very small families, but they built a lot. So we knew what was the whole process. So that was something actually quite interesting for us to see. There is no universal answer. Actually, there's a combination of many complex issues over there. But yeah, we did this mapping.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Professor Maza, we have a question for you. And before I read it, I would just like to comment that we have a very caring nickname for this Minha Casa Minha Vida program, and also now Casa Verde Amarela, which is my house, my lifelong debt, and my peace at the end of the world. Because it's often families are indebted for many years to pay for these homes that tend to be removed from the life of the city itself. The question that came to you is, beside the technical and environmental considerations, did you have considerations for preserving and reinforcing people's social networks?
Reinforcing social network. I think it is the sustainable development is not necessarily energy environmental perspective. Having looked at the sustainable development goal, is the 17 aspect is involved, and traditional sustainable development is a purely socio-economic environmental sustainability. But today we have to understand the gender equalities and hungers and poverty, all kind of things related to human dimensions. So what I found, the Minha Casa Minha Vida programs, they are like a short for is they're pretty much focused on their product itself. As the question itself is more kind of human-centric aspect. So more technology focus, a use of their building materials, and then try to enhance their efficiency and productions, and because of their money, I mean cost, very much cost-focused approach, and regardless of how the house will be lived and how the house will be grown through the dynamic changes of user needs and demands. And having looked at the favela, or I visited there, I have friends there, many friends there. So I quite often, Rohinto, I quite often go there and talk to my friends, and they say that is really great place. It's speaking on their infrastructure, some of the local housing development done through the Minha Casa Minha Vida is there already solar panels in it, solar panels on top of it, but they still, they don't know how to use it. I mean, there's the switch, a use of the ordinary tank and then solar tank, and they're not gonna change it. So, and then they always use the ordinary tank rather than solar the panel. So there's no benefit from it. I mean, first of all, they're irresponsible in terms of how the housing should be utilized. They are not going to provide you any guidelines and the manual how to use the house efficiently. And in the end, what happened? And the solar panel disassemble and they sell it. So this is the reality. So what I want to emphasize here is a social human dimension of the sustainability is extremely, extremely important. But the Mia Casa, Mia Vida programs pay less attention to this particular area. Therefore, we should, probably we need to more pay attention to the experience, human experience in line with the technology advancement. So this is something I like to emphasize. Human experience should be incorporated into their design decision making.
Thank you so much. We have very few minutes left, and Leo, there is a question for you. So you have 2 minutes after I read it. They are all thanking all of you for the beautiful presentations. And the question is about the idea of tourism, pollution, and over-tourism or over-dependence on tourism economies. How did awareness of this idea first arise, and through what action processes this idea arose? Perhaps you also have access to it written down and it's easier for you to.
No, but that's okay. In the specific case of Noronha, that's been an ongoing concern, and part of the reason why some of the protected areas were declared in the first place was to try to counter processes of mass tourism. Tourism is both a problem and something that the community benefits from. When it comes to Fernando de Noronha, it brings a lot of environmental issues when we think about carbon emissions and people traveling to the island, but also the need to transport, a lot of supplies to the island in order to serve all these tourists. But it's also the way they found to economically sustain the island in a sense. So it's many consider it to be the lifeblood of the island, but they also recognize all the different problems that arose from it. They try to work out that equation, but it's not something simple. In fact, inflation and very high prices for goods and services for the community derives from that very high number of tourists that visit the island. And when we think about the restrictions that are put into place and the very complex environment in which these communities have to live when it comes to building their homes and making extensions and everything, it becomes really challenging. For many families, instead of investing in their own homes in Noronha, they prefer to invest that money in properties on the mainland because it's a lot simpler. Right, so this lack of connection between global knowledge and local knowledge seems to me to be a very big issue. And just as the other panelists were pointing, if there's no understanding of the reasons why things have been implemented in a certain way, communities can't benefit from those improvements, such as solar panels and so on and so forth. But also, if communities want to improve their livelihoods and their homes, and they can't understand a very complex regulatory framework that applies to those places, they just feel discouraged, right? They rather do something else, or they may leave the places, derelict in a sense. In Noronha, there's another thing which adds another layer of complexity, which is nobody owns the land there, because all the land and any development is part of what we call the property of the Union, or the property of the Federative Republic of Brazil, right? So people feel even more discouraged to invest in their properties there because it's not theirs in the end, right? Whatever improvement they make becomes embedded into the land itself, which is owned by the federal level.
Thank you so much, Leonardo. There is a complement to the question, that is, if you could recommend some key literature on this subject.
Yes, most of the literature on that subject can be accessed through some of the links that I have in that article, especially the thesis itself. There's a vast list, to be honest, but if the person asking that question could send that request, perhaps to my email or to the organizers, I'll be happy to get back to them with specific literature on what they are looking for.
Thank you so much. And thank all of you, Leonardo, Sandro, Maza, for these beautiful presentations. I feel like we just scratched the surface and we could be talking about this for hours. This event was recorded and it will be made available at the MSD website shortly. And I would like to leave an invitation to all those attending and to your networks that there will be a next installment of this seminar series on August the 10th, which is also a Wednesday, focusing on learning Southern urbanisms in the time of COVID-19. Very pressing topic. I'm sure it will be very engaging. I hope I'm not forgetting anything important. Thank you so very much for this shared opportunity, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Ariadne.